Good evening, Canes fans. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Rod the Bodcast. Tonight is Offseason Part 5. Time will tell. If you finished the 2021 season really excited about the trajectory of the Carolina Hurricanes, you have a Calder finalist in net, a top 5 finisher in the Norris. Well, next year you get to root for a completely new team. Joined tonight with my co-host Mike May. What do you think?
Yeah, there's obviously been a lot of change this offseason, a lot of change that Canes fans aren't excited about, a lot of change that we should be excited about. We're going to break it all down for you in this episode. We're going to give you our takes on everything and maybe touch a little bit on where we see the franchise going from here.
I think this discussion, and we'll get into, I know the hot button issue right now is the Dougie DeAngelo signing, but I think we're going to start this episode tonight focusing on the players that are no longer here with us in Raleigh. And I don't think you can begin that discussion without talking about a guy that scored one of the biggest goals in Canes history, Brock McGinn.
Yeah, Brock McGinn, character guy, heart and soul of the Carolina Hurricanes for a long time. I mean, when a guy like Rod Brind'Amour always emphasizes you as the guy that he would love to play with when he was playing, like, you know that means something, right? Like, he's a guy that showed it on the ice every day. Did he live up to the expectations of being a potential guy that was a second-line guy that scored goals? Maybe not, but do we absolutely love him for his time in Carolina? For sure.
Yeah, he scores that huge goal versus Washington in double overtime in 2019 to win Game 7. But it's so much more than that. I think a guy that oftentimes fans maybe had a little bit of frustration with because he was overslotted, in the top line role. But he's a guy that at the end of the day, when Rod Brind'Amour, not only the head coach, but basically Mr. Hurricane himself, says you embody what it means to be a Hurricane, I don't think there's any higher praise than that. So I know we'll miss Brock, the posts, the killing penalties, the good and the bad. But I think that was the right way to begin this episode because of anyone else, even Dougie Hamilton, who we'll talk a lot about, Brock McGinn was a true Hurricane and we'll miss him. And it hurts that he's in the Metro.
Yeah, and he's absolutely earned the contract that he got because ultimately in Carolina, he is a fourth liner kind of Swiss Army knife guy that you expect to play the majority of his minutes on the fourth line, and $2.75 million by 4 years. That's a very heavy burden to carry on your fourth line. And I think he deserves the money he got. I think he's going to get a better shake of being a third line guy in Pittsburgh. And I think he's going to have a really great career. We're going to miss him for a lot of reasons. I wish him the best. And I think I speak for both of us when I say we appreciated the player he was for us for the however many years. Honestly, it was a long time.
He is a great Hurricane, and his legacy here will live on for that goal in Game 7. Outside of Brock, the Canes lost Peter Mrazek to Toronto, James Reimer to San Jose. Obviously, Ned was traded to Detroit, as we talked about last episode. In the forward group, Cedric Paquette has been signed by the Montreal Canadiens. Warren Fogle traded to Edmonton. We're going to talk about that one a lot. Jake Bean traded to Columbus. Morgan Geekie obviously selected in the expansion draft. And lastly, today, Yanni Hakanpää signs a 3-year, $1.5 million per deal with Dallas. Mike, initial thoughts?
So when we talked about this, it was kind of the understanding that Peter and Reimer would be out the door. We've talked about the Ned situation. We'll follow up a little bit more on the goalie situation. I'm happy for Reimer. Got a good contract. Peter, we'll see how that one shakes out. I think Toronto, that's a whole different ballgame.
It was a little overpay for me, but
yeah,
is he probably the 1B behind Campbell there?
It's an interesting scenario because when they came out talking about Anderson, they talked about how they needed somebody to complement Campbell. And I don't see Mrazek as a guy that cares to be the complementary piece anymore. And signing somebody to a $3.8 million 3-year, correct?
Yeah,
deal? That's a commitment.
It's borderline one money. So yeah, we'll see how that works out in Toronto for that fervent fan base, which is dire for playoff success. Another former Cane that we're extremely happy for is Yanni Hakanpää, who was traded here at the deadline for Hayden Fleury from Anaheim and landed a nice deal in Dallas. Apparently his services were pretty well desired across the league. And so for him to get a multi-year deal with such limited NHL experience, I think that speaks a lot about him. Sad to see him go, although he was only here for a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think an awesome deal for him. You're always happy when you see a guy finally break into the NHL and get to stick. I think this deal is that deal. He's got 3 years, $1.5 million in Dallas. He's going to have an opportunity to be on an NHL roster for the next 3 years, and I'm excited for the guy. I think he's got solid game. I mean, 6'7" defenseman. He provides you with a little bit of physicality. He's a fine skater for his size, not a bad puck mover, all right defensively. I mean, he's for $1.5 million, you're getting a pretty solid contribution to your roster, so I'm excited for him.
I don't think too much needs to be said about Cedric Paquette. I don't think his time here lived up to what he expected or what the franchise did. You want to talk the two trades that have occurred since our last episode, Bean and Fogle, and then we'll get to the elephant in the room with Dougie Hamilton. How about that?
That sounds good.
Jake Bean dealt on draft night, second rounder to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Initial takeaways, what are your thoughts?
Well, when you have a guy that asks for a trade, ultimately you want him to be traded. And that's the way I look at it from a management perspective. If a guy doesn't want to be in the organization, if he doesn't feel like he's getting the fair shake that he thinks he deserves, you don't want to be a club that intentionally stifles talent. You want to give him a chance. He had a great beginning to last season. Towards the end, it kind of got worse and worse and worse. I don't think he played terrible. He didn't play great. He's still a project. He has a high ceiling, in my opinion, and I think he could be a really good top 4 NHL defenseman. I don't think it matches up with Carolina's timeline. I respect him for wanting to go somewhere and get an opportunity. Obviously, Columbus thought of him highly. They gave him 3.233, I believe, today. So he's going to get an opportunity to go to a rebuilding team and be a real piece of that roster. So I'm happy for him.
I love the point you made about fitting the Canes window. And I think some people get hung up on the fact that this is a former first round pick and you traded him for a second rounder. Well, once the pick's made, it's a sunk cost. And although he had a sterling career, minors coming up through the AHL, defenseman of the year, all that stuff, he's not where this team needed him to be in the NHL. And it was kind of exposed in the playoffs. So forget the return, because the return value is fine because he is now an NHLer and he doesn't, his value doesn't equate to that of being worthy of a first round pick. So don't get hung up on that. Is this the kind of deal that could turn around in a few years and Jake Bean has emerged as a legitimate, offensive driving defenseman, power play quarterback? Yes. And that's the risk. However, as a former player myself, I totally, vibe with him going, hey, I need to bet on myself and go somewhere where I'm going to have more opportunity. If you're Carolina, you recognize that he doesn't fit your window. Go ahead and get a valuable asset, make a draft pick. And, we're going to spend an entire episode talking prospects and draft picks. So don't think we forgot about the draft. But I think it just makes a lot of sense for both sides here. And wish him the best. I hate that it's another guy that's in the, division. Yeah. But he's not the kind of guy that I think the fans thought he was when he flashed in March. But we'll see. His book's not written. I think it's a fair deal for both sides. And at the any other thoughts?
At the end of the day, you have to respect the organization he's an RFA. They have control. And the organization said, okay, we hear you. You want to trade. We're willing to, take care of you and get you somewhere to where you'll have an opportunity to play. Not every organization feels that way about RFAs, right? You could have really dug your heels in and said, we're going to trade you wherever we want to trade you. We're going to wait as long as we have to wait to get the value we get, right? So I think they did well by Bean. I think they're giving him an opportunity he deserves. I think the return is good. We'll talk about this more in the draft episode, but with the Canes philosophy, high risk, high reward, you never know when that second, third, fourth, fifth rounder, I mean, sixth, seventh, heck, it could be any round. The way they draft is high risk, high reward. They're looking for dudes at every single level. And when I say dudes, I mean a guy that is going to be an impact player on your roster. They're not as concerned about drafting fourth liners, third pairing defensemen, backup goalies. They're looking for
their
guys.
Thing's not just getting guys that might play a handful of games in the league. They want guys that can actually impact the roster. And
game breakers.
The next order of business is to obviously talk about the Warren Foegele for Ethan Bear trade. Mike, do you have any initial thoughts on that?
So it's very similar to the Bean trade. Warren Foegele wasn't happy with the role he had within the organization. I feel the same way about it as I do the Bean trade. I think I understand him wanting a better chance. It's not going to happen in Carolina. We discussed that on previous episodes. He didn't beat out Nino Niederreiter. If the team is looking to upgrade the top six, then he's even further outside of that mix. So let the guy go somewhere. I mean, if he can find his way onto McDavid's line, right? I mean, even if it's for 15 games of the season, you should end up with 15 or so points right there.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, for me, it seems like the fans in Edmonton were pretty disappointed to lose Ethan. And that's typically a good sign for an incoming player. I think when you look at his analytics, he's an offensive driver that didn't produce points, at least last year, and he was a bit of defensive liability. So that's concerning. And I think the other negative component, which you briefly alluded to, is if somehow Warren Foegele ends up playing with Dry or McDavid, I mean, he's going to set a career high in points. And
absolutely.
So this, without, looking deep into the analytics and expected goals and things of that nature, if you just look at pure production, this trade could turn into, some semblance of a nightmare for Carolina. Regardless, I think that'll be a bit of an overreaction. In Ethan Bear, they're getting a younger player that has the opportunity to, probably going to start in your third pairing as the right shot element, playing with Ian Cole. I think that could be a good tandem that should balance each other out pretty well. Any extra thoughts before we get into the Dougie Hamilton discussion?
Yeah, so I think Foegele will have a great opportunity in Edmonton. I hope that he has a career year for himself. We'll see more about that as time goes on. I think Ethan Bear has top four quality. He might be borderline top four, but I think when you plug in a guy with his skating and offensive upside and you plug him in with Ian Cole, like you mentioned, as your stay-at-home defenseman, as your third pairing, I think you've massively upgraded your third pairing this year. I think that the second pairing stays the same, right? And Shea and Pesci most likely. We'll talk more about
the top pairing in a bit. Well, speaking of the top pairing for the Carolina Hurricanes, for the past couple of seasons, it's obviously been Jacob Slavin and Dougie Hamilton. Dougie Hamilton, for all the great production, just never seemed to fully convince people that he was a true number one. He definitely has his detractors in the hockey guys culture. Analytics love him. I know you probably think he was overpaid. I think we can both agree that Carolina's rumored final offer was a bit comical.
Yeah.
Where do you land in this whole discussion? Because for me, and I'll let you go first, it is malpractice in team building what Carolina's doing right now.
So, and we've kind of talked about this, but for me, my greatest fear is missing your window. And I think that this team has a potential to be a team that has a 10-year window. If we want to be real, if the team makes the right moves, I think year one of the window is this year. And I think the end of the window is whenever Svetch's long-term deal is up. So if he signs a 2-year bridge this year followed by an 8-year, it looks like a realistic 10-year window to me. if you can retain guys like Aho, the guys that are what the organization sees to be the core, obviously, because they're the guys that they've invested in, I think this team has a really long window. The fear for me, which I discussed with you, is do I think that you're probably getting $9 million worth of value out of Dougie in years 1, 2, and maybe 3 of that deal? Probably. Do I think year 3 is probably cutting it close? Yeah. Do I think year 4 is going to get worse? I do think there is going to be a substantial drop off in play. I think you're looking at more of the years of the contract probably being way, way, way overpaid than not. And I know you have to pay to win in a window, and you have to have bad contracts like we've talked about, but I'm not sure the Canes were fully convinced that this was the bad contract to take to make them a true winner. And I don't know how much they think about this, because it's not necessarily a winner's mentality, but you look at how a team like Colorado's built right now, and even Tampa Bay to a certain extent, and you say those teams have a really good shot the next couple of years. Once we'll see if McKinnon lives up to his words and takes another team-friendly deal, but I can't imagine it's going to be remotely close to as team-friendly as it currently is, right? And Tampa Bay is going to age out. So I think that they see it as we're going to be a contender in the short run, and we're next in line after Tampa on the East Coast side, and we're probably battling with Colorado. I don't know how Vegas ages. That's another story.
So for me, I think to view it that way is slightly dangerous, because the league is designed for parity. And I fully agree with you. I think the Dougie Hamilton contract, for those, he got what? 9 times 7?
7 by 9.
7 by 9. That's $9 million over 7 years for the New Jersey Devils. I think the first 3 years of that, he's probably going to be worth the money. Analytics says he's worth the money. The next 2 years, he'll probably be at value or slightly below. And then the last couple are going to be ugly. For me, based on where the Hurricanes contracts are right now, I thought you had a 3-year window with this core group of guys, because most of those contracts are up within that 3-year window. And the way I view team building is I don't care about the secondary and tertiary elements as much. My core of this team is Aho, Svetch, Necas, Turbo, Slavin, Pesci. It was Hamilton, and they didn't have a goalie. So for me, you do everything that you can to keep those guys together. You don't let the Nino Niederreiter contract, you don't let the Jake Gardner contract inhibit your ability to build around those guys, because if you lose those guys, then your team is taking a step back.
Yeah.
On paper, although we believe that, at least I do, the goalie duo of Frederick Anderson and Antti Ranta is way more talented than Peter Mrazek and Ales Nedeljkovic, just on pure regression, we're likely not going to see the same statistical performance from those guys. And in my mind, that is the only point in the roster where this team has improved this offseason. Defensively, I think losing a guy like that, and we'll talk about how they replaced him, and I think it's plausible, although we may not like the person they brought in, that you can replicate some of his production. I think what we're going to find is they're now, whereas when I felt like they ended the season as probably the number 4 team in the league, they're probably more so in that cluster of, 5 to 10. And it's going to require Andrei Svechnikov to jump. But for me and others, young players, Martin Necas, all those guys, but instead of you're making the jump from that top 4 team into being maybe the number 1, 2, or 3 team, you're jumping back into that group. Yeah. Because I think you've lost a player, and hey, this puts them in a healthier cap situation to maybe next year is only a slight regression. Maybe the D plays better than I'm anticipating and they don't regress at all. But right now on paper, it's a slightly worse team. And maybe the jump is the following season. Maybe they don't view their window as now. Yeah. They keep saying they're a win now team. their moves aren't really indicative of that unless, and maybe it's the time, unless we believe Tony DeAngelo can replicate the offensive performance, at least 80% of it, that Dougie Hamilton has provided. So this team doesn't completely have to change and augment how they've played to become a legitimate contender.
Yeah, and we'll touch on DeAngelo a little bit here in the next couple of minutes, but circling back on Dougie, when you look at what the organization offered him, and we can all agree, like even based on what we talked about in previous episodes, they came in way undervalued.
I mean, they came under the Krug deal, which was like
they came in at
basement.
From what we heard, they came in at 8 years, $6.2 million,
which is 50,
which is $13 million less with one more year of term than what New Jersey offered, which is a clear statement to me, because I don't believe they made that decision off being cheap. I think it is a direct representation of what they see his long-term value of being. It hurts.
Let me cut in real quick.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the cheap thing, because for those wondering, our next episode will probably cover all next step moves. We have a prospects and draft episode coming up, but then we're going to devote an entire episode talking about this front office, their contract negotiations, and how we would have viewed team building. So I think that's important, because as we slow down, get into the doldrums of the offseason, we're going to tell you where we disagree with the league, because with the franchise, because we don't just want to be a mouthpiece for the team. We want to give a bare bones, honest scope through Canes hockey that doesn't just, hey, we trust Don and Tom to make the right decision. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but I think that's important.
No, absolutely. Like, we want to look at this from a logical perspective of what you and I actually think, because there's going to be a plethora of times where we disagree with the front office, and we're not in a position where we have to agree with the front office. We're not paid by the Carolina Hurricanes. We can say whatever we want and give you guys information that we think is factual and informational. So, I mean, the organization in my book, and we've talked about this briefly, but public analytics are far different from private analytics within professional organizations. We've heard that from people within professional organizations. All I can really grasp on my head to make this make sense is that their model must really not like 28 to 35 or 36 Dougie Hamilton, because there's no other excuse for offering what they offered.
Right.
And otherwise, that's an absolute massive mistake by them.
Yeah, and it still could be. I mean, it very well could be. If DeAngelo implodes as a human being, like people expect him to, then you don't have that element. And that is detrimental to this team's potential of even potentially making the playoffs, because you got the Rangers improving. The Islanders have been great.
New Jersey's
improving. Well, I think the Dougie contract was probably a year too early for them, but hey, they got a young core. They're building it the right way. They're still Pittsburgh and Washington. The Metro, debatably the toughest division in the league. And any slight regression back can mean, this team's not even in the postseason. So it's a dangerous, play. And I think they're playing the lottery ticket approach, that they're buying low on a guy with character concerns that, hey, when he's out there and he's right and he's towing the company line, he has produced. And I don't know, we're going to get to him, but just focusing on Dougie for one more minute. I think we obviously wish him well in New Jersey. Not where I'd want to spend the next 7 years.
I don't wish him well.
Hate that he's in the division. Hope he performs well, except when he's playing versus Carolina, and hopefully that team never makes the jump into actual contention.
I can agree with that.
But other than that, wish him the best. Obviously, huge Dougie supporters. You ready to talk Tony DeAngelo?
We got to talk about it at some point, so we might as well hop in.
So as everyone knows, the Carolina Hurricanes front office made the questionable, highly debated decision to sign Tony DeAngelo, formerly of the New York Rangers, to a 1-year, $1 million contract. DeAngelo obviously has a history of, well, he's 15. He got in trouble he got suspended for a racial slur, has a history of incidents with referees and fights with a teammate. Not generally the type of, guy that the casual sports fan can understand gets an opportunity in sports. Unfortunately, talent will always, give you additional opportunities. I think we are of the mind that this is from a pure hockey perspective, this is an easy move for a team to make because the reward is there. And if he does step out of line, it's nothing to dump. Like, he's gone. Like, there's no second and third opportunities here. Carolina has people in the room that have played with him. Jesper Fast, Brady Shea, captain. Rumors, we know some Stalls around here. Jordan Stahl's brother, Mark Stahl, played with Tony DeAngelo for a number of years. The allegations and things that have been concerned are, well, concerning. And so I think as, a small mouthpiece for Carolina Hurricanes fans, I think the difficult part of this is, we want everyone to feel included. We don't want anyone to feel disenfranchised by the moves of an organization. We don't simply want to categorize this as a pure hockey move because there is a human element to this. However, if we really are about inclusion, just because a guy maybe doesn't align, with us ideologically, I think we don't know these guys, as human beings. And so I would just hope that everyone could give him an opportunity, although he may not deserve it, to try and get to know him and see what impact he can make on the community. And then if it's authentic, and if it's not, he's gone, man. They wouldn't have made this move if they hadn't done their homework. And I know reporters around the community, press Don and press Tony to give, explicit details about the work he's done as a human being. Although they didn't have concrete answers, I'm not sure we're privy to that information anyway. I'm sure, as was said, Tony talked to Don and Tom and Rod. And obviously, as we mentioned, there's former teammates and people around the NHL that he's played with, not only on this team, but in the league, that have, vouched for him. I don't know him. I'm not here to judge. Politically, I don't care. I'm a registered libertarian. I don't have a dog in this fight. I just think as a Carolina Hurricanes fan myself, since I don't know him, I'm not going to judge him. I'm going to see how he does in this community, because I think what is most important is seeing if he can actually show tangible growth. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, so obviously at no point are racial slurs something that either of us are going to support or try to defend. They're horrible. They shouldn't happen. It's terrible that it happened. Tony said it's in the last 10 years it hasn't happened again. I hope that's true. I hope he's grown from it. I am a person of the belief that I want to give people the chance to become better. I think it's better for our country. I think it's better for everyone to give people the opportunity to grow. My heart hurts for all the fans that are affected by the things he's said or done, because I know that he's said hurtful things, he's done hurtful things. But I think at the end of the day, the best thing that can come from this is Tony DeAngelo truly recognizing how all of the things he's done in the past hurt other people, and really deciding to make a change that is positive in the community going forward. And whether he needs to get involved in an organization that helps whatever demographic or however we want to do it, I don't care what he does, but he has an obligation in my book to go out there and be not just a sit back, quiet, don't cause trouble, but he needs to be a vocal leader that is positive in the community, that stands up for the things that he has hurt, right? He needs to be a voice that says, these things I did are wrong. I mean it. I'm not saying that because it's what I need to say. I'm saying it because I mean it. And he's going to have the opportunity to do so. You know that They're not just going to put him in a cupboard and say, play hockey and nothing. He needs to come out and be a positive part of the organization, a positive part of the team and the community.
Yeah, Mike, those are terrific points. And I'll equate it to a scenario that, people thought this human was irredeemable. Another athlete in Michael Vick that, obviously went to jail for the dogfighting charges. And although racism and dogfighting are not the same, they're both types of cruelty towards others. And what did Michael Vick do? He didn't get out of prison and, shut it down. He became very active with PETA and other, dog-centric organizations, was very much out in front of it and still works with those organizations today. If Tony DeAngelo can come here, and get out in front and be a positive influence in the community, I think that's a great thing. And I think he should realize that this is your last chance, man. Like, there's only so many opportunities you're going to get no matter how talented you are. So if he can be a positive influence in Raleigh, even if he's here for a short amount of time, I think we should all root for that. Like, we shouldn't root for people to
be monsters.
Exactly. He may prove us completely wrong and that he's incapable. And I think you and I will be the first two people to say, get lost, man. Like, you don't belong in this culture. But I have enough faith in Rod Brindamore, Jordan Stahl, the culture that they've built in that locker room, that he's not going to jeopardize, the locker room. He's not going to jeopardize what they have going here culturally. And I think I don't think he is going to be a detriment to the on-ice product, at least from a personality standpoint.
No. And he needs to be a better person. And he's sat back and admitted to his mistakes, and he said he's apologized for them, and that's good and all, but the only real thing that matters is tangible change. Have you changed as a human? I think that if you take a guy like Tony DeAngelo, and if you actually have him change and see how his actions are wrong and hurtful, I think that can be a positive part of society, because there's so many people that have those types of views that shut the door and won't listen and don't care what anyone else says to them, because it's a fight and it's a fight and it's a fight. I think the more people that change their perspective, it's only going to do everyone better in our local community, in the country, in the world. The more people that realize that these things are wrong and that this isn't like a thing I need to say to play hockey. This is a thing I need to actually understand matters. And I believe in change. I want people to change. I want people to become better. I think you can grow forever, right? I think there's always an opportunity to grow. I don't expect him to be welcomed in with open arms.
I don't think he's deserved that.
No, I don't think
earned
so.
that right. For me, and you hit the nail on the head, man. You really did. There's a significant differentiation between apologizing and tangibly shifting your worldviews and your behavior to assimilate to that, to rectify that apology, to make it tangible. And so for us, that's what we're going to be looking for. He's got to be held accountable for his actions, both past and present. But I think here in Raleigh, let's hope he can move forward and be a positive influence in the community, in the locker room, and on the ice.
Yep.
Now that we've shared our perspective on what we expect from Tony DeAngelo, the person, Mike, give the listeners an idea of what we can expect from him on the ice as an actual hockey player.
His game is very similar to Dougie's, to be totally honest. He's probably a better skater than Dougie. Analytics would say he is not as good of a defenseman as Dougie.
He's like Dougie light, but a better skater, and not as big, but maybe more physical.
Correct. So it's a little bit different animal. If he gets back to his 2019 season, he was, Norris caliber to an extent.
Sure, he finished 12th or got a vote.
Is he a guy that has potential to be a really great defenseman? Yes. If we're going to talk about hockey, Tony DeAngelo has the potential to be a big player on this Canes roster. If he is paired up with Slavin
which we expect,
which we anticipate, we'll see how it shakes out.
Well, as we know with Dougie, playing with Jacob Slavin can kind of mitigate those perceived deficiencies on defense.
Yes, and I think honestly, the biggest benefit to Slavin is more so the fact that he can recover quicker. When Dougie got burned, There was no catching up. The fact that DeAngelo could potentially close the gap quicker and allow Slavin to recover and then make the actual defensive play, I think you might see better defense from the tandem. We'll see if I'm overvaluing skating or not, but
yeah, my perspective. I think generally Dougie is undervalued defensively. I think his errors are often highlighted both on hockey Twitter, and he's just a divisive character throughout hockey culture. I think Tony DeAngelo can be adequate. I think, as I said, I believe he's more Dougie light, whereas Dougie was based on public analytics basically a 100%, a 99% offensive defenseman compared to his peers. Tony DeAngelo is a slight step down from that, but the difference being is Tony DeAngelo's production has equated to points. Dougie actually always underperformed based on his analytics. DeAngelo, the concerning part maybe is he's overperformed in that capacity. I don't know. I think if strictly speaking about hockey, if you can get 80% of Dougie Hamilton's offensive production from DeAngelo at a ninth of the price, if you ignore all the auxiliary factors that come with signing this guy, it's kind of a no-brainer move. And as we said earlier, we don't want this to boil down to just being a hockey decision. But if they truly did their homework and felt comfortable signing him based on the culture in their room and the feedback they got from his former teammates and people from around the league, it's a lottery ticket, and it's totally worth it, and allows you to lose a guy in Dougie Hamilton who may have upset your salary cap, especially in the flat cap era. And hey, maybe they're able to talk an 8-year deal for Svech now. Maybe they can bring in another top 6 forward, which is probably necessary. Ultimately, as a 6-person unit, it's slightly less than what it was last year, in my opinion, but you can argue it's equal. They're probably better in goal, although the numbers are going to regress just because it was a statistical anomaly what those guys produced just a season ago. So that leaves us this extra cap space, as I just alluded to. Do you believe the Canes are going to bring in another top 6 guy? Because for me, that's the differentiator where when you lose a Hamilton, as we've talked about many, many episodes, you had to replace production somewhere. They haven't done it unless you think it's in goal.
No.
So any final thoughts on Tony, his impact on the lineup before we talk about the direction of the team and other signings?
Yeah, so Tony, obviously, he's not going to be Dougie Hamilton. I think he has an opportunity to affect the roster in ways that Dougie didn't. He's not going to have the same play-driving offensive ability that Dougie has. When I look at the defensive unit that we have, the 6 players that we have on defense, I think the third line is greatly improved. I think when you look at an Ian Cole, Ethan Bear pairing, a pairing we talked about already, but you got a great stay-at-home defensive presence in Ian Cole with a high upside, top 4 potential puck-moving offensive defenseman. I mean,
you got great balance on all 3 pairings.
And everyone can skate.
That's probably the biggest differentiator that I'm not, factoring in as much, because I'm kind of looking at the analytics of the guys I don't know as well, and I'm going, man, Ethan Bear, I don't know if that's a fit. But when you pair him with Ian Cole, it's okay, we got some here. An offensive defensive element. Obviously, we've seen Shea Pesci for a while.
And now you have Slavin, DeAngelo.
And hey, I think it may be a slightly edgier group too. They're going
to be quicker.
We don't have a banger like Hakanpää anymore, but they're just positionally, I think the skating is a huge factor. And absolutely. I'm really glad you've made that assertion because, like I said, it kind of went over my head a little bit, or I just didn't think about it.
Yeah, and when you lose size, when you look at the Cale Makars, the Quinn Hughes, the guys like this, you're like, how does that work? And part of it is elusive when they're handling the puck behind the net, when they're making zone breakouts and whatnot. You can't touch the guys. I'm not saying that's the caliber of skater we have, but when you go away from a Dougie and a Hakanpää, who aren't bad skaters, certainly not great skaters, when you become a quicker team, a team that has better edge work, you're going to be able to get out of tighter spots better. And,
and
it matters.
I think that kind of pairs better with the stylistic forwards you have as well. Faster, skilled, great edge work guys. So maybe there will be a better meld and a fit, even though Dougie obviously had produced tremendously here. It was a little more static, stuff from the point, and, his ability to move the puck is how he made up for, not being an elite skater. But I think overall, if everyone skates well, it just raises the entire tempo of the team, which is wonderful. Yep. Where tempo doesn't matter as much, let's talk about the moves the Canes made in goal. With Frederik Andersen coming in from Toronto, 2 years, 4.5.
Yep.
And then Antti Ranta likely going to be the backup at 2x2.
I think,
or 1x2.
1 year, $2 million.
In my mind, significant upgrade, at least in talent, over Ned and Peter. Is this the win now cup contender veteran goalie that we thought it was going to be Frederik Andersen, but do we think Frederik Andersen is that guy? I mean, fairly pedestrian numbers since leaving Anaheim, didn't live up to the contract in Toronto. Is he the guy to get them over the hump? Is this a player that we think will play better in the system? I think there's a incorrect notion that even though the Hurricanes are good defensively, they don't give up good opportunities, which is not true. They actually give up a ton of high danger, and their expected goals is way higher than it was even just a year ago. So it is pretty goalie dependent. Can Frederik Andersen be that guy? And I know we think Antti Ranta is good. He just can't stay healthy. So what are your initial thoughts on these guys? And do you feel better about the goalie situation? Push, and can he be the guy to get him over the hump?
I feel better about it. I think Anderson has been a guy that we've been interested in and have tried to acquire in the past.
Drafted him originally, right?
We drafted him originally, but that's just a whole nother story. Didn't want to come to Carolina. Look what happens. Signs in free agency. Gotta love it.
We all make errors when we're young, man.
It's poetic. So you look at Anderson, and the Canes have been in on him. They must see what they think matches our system, and they must see a guy that they think is the difference maker for us. He's obviously had down years. We talked about this on previous podcasts. The Canes love him. They've loved him. He had to have been high on their list. We knew he was on the list. He had to have been very high. Darcy Kemper was high on the list. I think you look at the price that Colorado paid for him, and you're like, I would have probably paid it, but simultaneously, if Anderson can be even close to what Kemper is next season, it's almost the same dollar value. It's close.
Sure. And we've seen, in Arizona, we've seen Ranta basically be an equal with Kemper, even though Kemper was the one. It's always just been injury with him.
Yeah.
Anderson, we like him. I like him. You like him. I'm just not sure he's it. And a guy that struggled, especially in the playoffs for Toronto. I think, although I highlighted there's a little bit of a misnomer about the Carolina defensive system, I think it's obviously a better defensive team than Toronto. So what he's had playing in front of him. Maybe this is a guy that will come into this market, which is not the pressure cooker. We've won series within the past 20 years where he can be the number one without the expectations of what is the hardest market to play in the NHL.
Absolutely. And I look at it and I see a 2-year commitment to Anderson. And I see a 1-year commitment to Ranta. And it kind of boils all the way back to our previous discussions about Dougie and the window. And they haven't put themselves in a compromising position.
This isn't the Bobrovsky contract.
No. Would I have liked to see them give up assets for Gibson? Absolutely. I think Gibson, I would have been floored. I would have been like, that is a game changer to the roster.
Yeah, I don't care what his numbers are. That guy debatably is the most talented goalie in the league, other than Vasilevsky.
He is up there.
Even with Hellebuck, winning a Vezina, people within the game consider Gibson the best American goalie. Yeah. People still expect him to start for, the Olympic team. And it's like, that speaks higher because obviously Hellebuck's been incredible. That would have been a game-changing move. I think deep down in our hearts, I know we didn't talk about it a ton. We mentioned it, but that was like, if Don made that move, send it. Like,
hats off to him if he had made it. And I get it. They probably asked a lot. They know what they have. He's played on one of the worst teams in one of the worst divisions for a while now. So obviously the numbers aren't going to look great. Like we mentioned, we loved him. I think those were our three guys that we dialed in at as the 1A, being Kemper, Gibson, and Anderson. Anderson being the only guy available in free agency. It just makes sense, especially for an organization that likes to stockpile assets and doesn't want to give up on something that could be a game changer for them when they don't have to.
Sure, and I think because they are analytically oriented, they definitely feel like they improved in goal, but they're also not likely to be an organization that's heavily going to invest a significant long-term commitment in a goalie. Okay, so outside of solidifying the goalie tandem for the upcoming season, Mike, you want to go over the other signings the Canes made?
Yeah, so the remainder of the signings are ultimately depth signings. From new player perspective, you have Josh Lavo, CJ Smith, and Brendan Smith. The first two being forwards, the last one being a seventh defenseman.
And I know we've talked about it, but Ian Cole also brought in.
Yes, Ian Cole. We talked about him as a potential partner for Ethan Bear. Love the Cole signing. Think he really complements Bear on our third pairing. I see Lavo as a guy that's in and out of the lineup, fourth line kind of guy. CJ Smith probably more or less out of the lineup than in the lineup. Brendan Smith as like a hard-nosed insurance policy.
Seventh D-man.
As your third pairing defenseman. So,
okay, yeah, I really like the group. And, we talked about especially how the defense is probably piecing together. So the pivot is, and you'll notice one pretty much glaring omission, no impact signings on the front end. And surprisingly, they did bring back one of their own. They signed Jordan Martinook to a 3-year extension.
The Marty party continues.
Continues. I think everyone's pumped to have Jordan Martinook here for 3 more years. Universally considered a great guy and a great Hurricane. Curious if he keeps the A or if that pivots to Aho. That's really my only concern with Martinook, or question concerning Martinook. Anything to comment on there?
Man, it is an interesting conversation because when we thought he was gone, we talked about it. Aho's got the A. We're done. Conversation over.
Yep.
I really think Aho's got to have the A. I think that's got to have been part of the negotiation. Has been like, hey, why don't you come back? We want you to not focus on your leadership role. We want you to focus on being a dominant forechecking fourth line auxiliary guy that makes this roster go. I think it's time for Aho to get a leadership role. I think he deserves it. I think his play on the ice already shows as a leader. I think his voice in the locker room will only grow as he gets older. I know as he was younger, learning English and assimilating to a new country, it's never easy, but I think he's starting to get really comfortable. I think he's got to be a guy you see as a leader with a letter, in my opinion.
No doubt. And I completely align with you there. And with Jordan Martinook, it's, hey, come in, be the same guy, bring that energy. You still have a voice and a presence in the room. Just for the direction and ascent of the franchise, our best player needs to wear a letter. It's time. He's put, the years in, he's grown. It's his now. And I think Martinook, especially after seeing kind of what he thought the writing was on the wall for his time in Carolina, to be brought back, I think he probably realizes the A is going elsewhere. We won't know until about October, but that's just our perspective. So there's 2 more items to really sink our teeth into. One is, I think we're still a big time forward away from being a true contender. And in my mind, that's a guy that can slot in on one of your first two lines, bumps Nito down to more of like a scoring third line role. But a true finisher, in my mind, in my estimation, that's what this team needs. I'm not sure who's available. To me, that's probably going to be found on the trade market. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree? Do you think they're good where they are?
No, I think they absolutely need to add top 6 talent. I think they're one player away. I think realistically, you add one guy in your top 6, and you're looking at a really, really good NHL roster. I know the Canes were in on Saad. He's since signed with St. Louis, so he's off. I know we are still in on Tarasenko, as we talked about, a month ago now?
No, the rumor was today that the price is going down because he's not moving, and he's got to go.
As we predicted, it just smells like Canes. It smells like a Kane deal. Yep. It's exactly what we talked about.
When the price drops, they buy low. I mean, no one's better at buying the dip than this team. I think that's a move we'd really like to see. And even if he's, a fraction of the player he was at his highest end, he knows how to score goals. And I think it'd be a really exciting addition to this forward group and give them a ton of potency that they've kind of, just lacked a little bit of.
Yeah.
Last thing, roster construction, offseason 2021, heading into the fall. Still not a lot of news about restricted free agent Andrei Svechnikov.
Yep, it's a deal.
I hope it's something that's either they got the deal on the table or in the drawer, so to speak, as Elliot Friedman would say with the Alex Ovechkin contract. It's already done. We're just waiting. I'm hopeful that they kind of had a deal in place and they're just waiting to see where the roster is going to be at this point. And then from that point, they'll decide, okay, here's the 8-year deal we agreed on, and here's the bridge deal we agreed on. And depending on where the cap's at, that's when they'll move forward with one of those.
AKA, can you move Gardner?
Maybe that's hopeful. Maybe that's me just thinking that they can add a top 6 guy and sign Svech for 8. But any thoughts on the Svech deal? It is concerning, and this is something we'll touch on when we get into the front office eval and the team building conversation, because it is a little bit embarrassing. It doesn't mean they're cheap. They're going to be a cap team, but how they seem to negotiate with everyone. And that's a more macro discussion.
Yeah.
But are you hopeful I think we both feel like it gets done, but are you hopeful that the discussion is not going to be such a slog that it seems like every contract seems to be for this team?
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this, and when I look at the Svech contract, the number one thing that sticks out to me is you want this guy for 8 years. They wanted Aho for 8 years. He got offer sheeted. The organization came out and said there are delays in the contract, or we wanted 8 years, is ultimately what it boiled down to. Aho wanted a contract done. He was banking on there being a higher cap after 5 years are up, and that he would be worth substantially more than what his 8-year deal was. He was banking on years 6, 7, and 8 being not 9 or whatever that number would have been if he'd done an 8-year.
And thus far, he looks like he's going to be right.
Yeah, and he certainly has an opportunity to be right. We'll see what the cap looks like, as that is a super important piece of the equation. The Canes want Andrei Svechnikov. They're not going to sign him. If somebody hits him with a ridiculous offer sheet, he's still going to be in Carolina. There's no way.
They have the money for it right now. What's $14-15 million in cap space remaining. One flat cap era, no one's going to just come in and do that. He's safe. They'll have plenty of time to negotiate with him. It's just not something you want lingering over the team as you get into training camp and preseason and into the fall.
If you can get an 8-year deal out of it and you can do it before the end of August, and I know that feels like a really long time, but if you can get an 8-year deal done and go into September and no hiccups, then you're looking at a big time win, because you
want to establish some credibility back with your fan base.
Yeah.
Sign your ascending, franchise player to an 8-year deal. Show them that you're committed. Do the right thing and take care of one of your own, and that'll build up a little bit more goodwill. Because right now, people are freaking out in the streets here in Raleigh about the offseason and just don't see the direction forward. I think we're a little bit more optimistic, at least on the on-ice product. Obviously, there's a whole nother factor outside of that. Any final thoughts on the early stages of free agency and where we're going in subsequent episodes?
Yeah, I think we have work to do still. I think we're going to be looking at a scenario where Jake Gardiner is dealt, bought out, or put on LTIR. We'll see. I haven't heard an update on the injury or anything along those lines. If any three of those scenarios happen, you're going to receive cap back. If there is a scenario where you receive cap back, you can potentially sign Svetch to an 8-year deal and bring on Tarasenko at a $7.5 million cap hit over the next 2 years. I think the biggest win that could come out of this offseason is having the Svetch deal done for 8, bringing on Tarasenko. The goal, we've talked about the goalies, we've talked about the defense. I think you add Tarasenko to your top 6. I think if you can get anywhere close to 20 goals from Nino on the third line, if Jordan Stahl has even remotely similar production, which we expect him to regress, but if that third line can come out and really perform, and you have Nino on your third line and he buys in, and you have Tarasenko in your top 6, and Svetch is locked in for 8 years, as a Canes fan, you have a lot to be excited about.
Well, then your forward group's better. Your defense maybe is slightly worse or a scratch, and you're better in goal. Even if the numbers don't show it, you're better. So that would put you back in that top tier of teams that I talked about. I don't feel they're with right now. Long way to go. Don't judge all the roster moves, as a final product. You still got, a couple months until October till they even get into training camp, with the season starting October 14th versus the Islanders. Mike, final thoughts?
I think we are witnessing a work in progress. It's a puzzle. All the pieces haven't been put together. I know things are absolutely stressful in the Canes fandom.
People have every right to feel hurt and disenfranchised right now and questioning what's going on. It's not wrong for people to think that, but stay the course. Although we're not, mouthpieces for the team, all they've done since Dundon took over is win. And so maybe they know something we don't. And that's what I keep coming back to. Just trust in the process, and because the product's been good. Now, do I believe these current practices can get you over the top? I'm a little more iffy about that. But I think they can get you a contender. And I think that's the perfect way to kind of end this episode, because I think next time we're going to talk, current news, but also get into the real deep dive into evaluating this front office and their questionable negotiation and team building techniques. And we're going to be very transparent and kind of dive right in. And it's probably not going to be the most, positive, despite the results, probably not going to be the most positive reflection of how we think a team should be operated. But it'll be a fun discussion and super collaborative. I'm excited for it. What about you, Mike?
I'm excited, and we'll dive in, and you guys can let us know how you feel about it.
Yeah, please jump in on social. Tell us what we got wrong, what we got right. Yep. Tell us we're stupid. That's okay too.
Yeah, we're here for it.
Tell them where to find us, Mike.
You can follow us on Instagram at The Bodcast and on Twitter at The Bodcast. Please make sure to subscribe, follow, like, and rate the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. We are on, but not limited to, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening, and don't hesitate to reach out on any platform.